Both social formations are completely estranged even though for different reasons from the objective association for specific purposes. One of the most comprehensive and fundamental sociological norms is in operation here. One of the few rules that may be established with some degree of generality concerning the form of social development is this, that the enlargement of the group goes hand in hand with the individualization and independence of its individual members. The evolution of societies usually commences from relatively small groups which hold their elements in strict and equal bonds and then proceeds to a relative larger group which affords freedom, independence and mutual differentiation. The history of family formations such as that of religious communities, the development of economic cooperatives and political parties all illustrate this type. The importance of money for the development of individuality is thus very closely related to the importance that it possesses for the enlargement of social groups. This latter role requires no further elaboration here. I have previously analyzed the interaction between the money economy and the size of the economic unit. The more people develop relationships with one another, the more abstract and generally acceptable must be their medium of exchange. Conversely, if such a medium exists, then it permits agreements over otherwise inaccessible distances, an inclusion of the most diverse persons in the same project, an interaction and thereby a unification of people who, because of their spatial, social, personal and other discrepancies in interests, could not possibly be integrated into any other group formation. General relations between a money economy and the principle of individualism. How close the relationship is between the money economy, individualization and enlargement of the circle of social relationships is exemplified by the character of commercial trade, which stands in an obvious relationship on the one hand to the advancing money economy and on the other to the enlargement of relationships that extend beyond the close, self-sufficient group of primitive times. Therefore, trade has a distinctive character because, except at its highest levels, it possesses no techniques that are as complicated as the crafts or as traditionally established as agriculture. The merchant is, to a lesser extent than other economic pursuits, dependent upon training, which always involves a closer and closer relationship with the direct environment, or upon personal and objective tradition, which levels individual specialties, or upon inheritance, upon which the crafts were originally dependent and upon which land ownership still is dependent. It is reported from India that the hereditary nature of occupations is less decisive in commercial trade than it is in manufacturing. It is the techniques of trade that enable the traveling merchant, the pioneer of the money economy who breaks the boundaries of the group, to resist the equalization and amalgamations of other vocations and to insist on his individual ability and risk-taking. I can demonstrate the same correlation in a somewhat far-fetched case. It makes a great deal of difference whether the winner of a competition is awarded an honorary or a money prize. The money prize pays him off, he receives what he deserves. The honorary prize has further consequences. It gives distinction to the whole person, which, under specific circumstances, a money prize may also do, although it is not part of its nature. The money prize refers to the performance, the honorary prize to the performer. But in this latter sense, a tribute to a person is often possible only within a relatively small circle. Such honor, which implies no distinction for the individual, originates only within a small group that keeps itself closed, powerful and unassailable by means of the distinctly defined integrity of its members as, for instance, the officer's honor, the merchant's honor, the honor of the family, even the often cited rogue's honor. Every kind of honor is originally the honor of an estate or class, and the honor of man in general or of the single individual only places such demands upon the person as are agreed upon by all the smaller groups within the larger. The honor that does not subordinate its representative to others but brings him into prominence also requires a certain narrowness and solidarity of the group. The name of the victor at the Olympics resounded through the whole of that part of Greece that was closely knit together by this interest. The money prize has an egotistic quality which suggests itself to members of a large group. The unegotistic character which corresponds to the solidarity of the small group is most beautifully symbolized by the custom that the golden wreath presented by the Athenian Council of the 500 for good administration was set aside in the temple. Within smaller and closed interest groups, as for instance for sport affairs or for industrial experts, the honorary prize is fully justified even today. But in so far as the restriction and homogeneity of the group is replaced by openness and heterogeneity, the honorary prize, which reflects the cooperation of the whole group, has to be replaced by the money prize, which reflects the ultimate recognition of the performance. The enlargement of the social group requires the transition to expressing merit in money terms because it means the inescapable atomization of such a group. Since it is impossible to provoke the same sentiment in the same manner in a large group as in a small one, distinction within a large group requires a means by which the recipient is no longer dependent upon the agreement and cooperation of the whole group. It may be emphasized in this context that money has just as close a relationship to the widening of the social group as to the objectification of the contents of life. This parallel is no mere coincidence. What we term the objective significance of things is, in practice, their validity for a larger circle of subjects, in that they outgrow their first connection with the individual person or a small group, and the fortuitousness of subjective interpretation. Their perception or formation becomes valid and significant for an increasingly large circle, even if in reality the obstacles in the situation make their general acceptance impossible. In the course of this development, they gain what we call their objective reality or their objectively adequate form, even though the actuality of the ideal validity that is indicated by these concepts rejects all relations with becoming or not becoming recognized. In both respects, the importance of money confirms the closeness of this correlation, which asserts itself in many specific areas. Commercial law in the Middle Ages in Germany was originally only the cooperative law of the individual merchant groups. It developed into a common law on the basis of the universalistic notion that the whole merchant class of the German Empire, or even of the world, in fact formed a huge guild. Thus, the common law of the merchant class developed into a common law of commercial transactions. This development clearly shows how the law, in its extension from a narrow to a much wider group, detaches itself from a relationship to mere persons and becomes a law of objective transactions. It was this development that was favored by and that also favored an increasing extension of money transactions. Whereas the technical difficulty of transporting the values of a barter economy over long distances already restricts it to a relatively small number of individual economic spheres, money, by virtue of its perfect mobility, forms the bond that combines the largest extension of the economic sphere with the growing independence of persons. The concept that mediates this correlation between money on the one hand and the extension of the group as well as the differentiation of individuals on the other is often private property as a whole. The small group with a barter economy tends towards common property. Every enlargement of such a group forces it towards the allocation of portions of property. With the very considerable growth in the number of participants, the administration of common property becomes so complicated and conflict-laden, the probability of quarrelsome individuals pressing for escape from communistic restrictions grows to such an extent, the division of labor that conflicts with communal property and a higher degree of efficiency becomes such a necessity, that one is justified in interpreting private property as a direct consequence of the quantitative increase in the group. A 12th-century Irish manuscript states that the distribution of land was carried out because the number of families had grown too large, while in Russia, where we still have occasion to observe the transition from communal to private property, it is quite clear that the mere increase in population favors and accelerates this process. However, money is clearly the best-suited foundation for the private and personal form of property. The distribution in separate parts, the fixing of property rights, the realization of individual claims has been made possible only by money. Exchange as such is the primary and purest scheme for the quantitative enlargement of the economic spheres of life. Through exchange, the individual fundamentally extends himself beyond his solipsistic circle, much more so than by robbing or giving presents. Exchange in its basic features is possible, however, only with private property. All collective property tends towards mort main, whereas the specific wishes of the individual and his need of supplementation make exchange necessary for him. Possessions must first be concentrated in the individual for them to spread out from there through the process of exchange. Money as the absolute